Again, this is the dignified transfer. You don't hear any audio right now, and that's actually on purpose. There is no audio being provided. It's a solemn occasion. The soldiers' remains are now in transfer. We see the president there with his hand over his heart, First Lady Jill Biden, Secretary Austin also there as well. 3 service members killed in that drone strike, and of course, more than 40 others who were injured.
And here, as we see the tape pick back up again, we're going to watch as you do along with the rest of our audience here. This is a solemn event that we have seen many times before unfolding at Dover Air Force Base. And what we know about this is that the Air Force has specific teams that help the families of the fallen from the time of their arrival into the area there to the time that they leave. And so what these images don't show is the accompanying airmen who volunteer, as we understand it, for that very sacred duty of accompanying the family members during this difficult time. There you see the commander-in-chief, of course, President Biden there, Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, alongside him. So we're watching this tape perhaps a bit out of order as it gets fed to us. We're unclear as to, oh, I see they're now embarking, perhaps leaving the area now. So this is the extent of the video. We're seeing it just as you are, as it's coming out of the Delaware area. But this, again, is part of that event, solemn event, dignified transfer of the remains of the 3 soldiers who were killed last weekend in a drone attack in Jordan. Sergeants William Rivers, Ladon Sanders, and Breonna Moffett were killed. And there is no audio, as Lana said just a moment ago. This is how the feed comes into us. But this is one of the rituals here for the families as the remains are brought back to the United States. Joining us now is CBS News national security correspondent David Martin at the Pentagon. And David, we were just telling our audience about the role that the airmen in particular play, which you don't necessarily see on camera here, accompanying the families during this very difficult time. Could you talk to us a bit about that?
Well, each family is assigned what's called a casualty assistance officer, and it's usually someone who knew the fallen soldier, and they try to help the family through all of the nightmarish logistical difficulties that you face when something like this happens. Among other things, these families lived in Georgia. They have to get from Georgia on a plane up here in time to meet the president, and they've got all this surreal stuff going on for them. They've had the knock on the door, they've had the phone call from the president, and they're, as you might expect, have a hard time functioning. And that is, among other things, what these casualty assistance officers do for them. If you've ever talked to anybody who's had the misfortune to witness their loved one come back to Dover, some of them will tell you that it really hits home when that flag-draped coffin comes off the plane. Up until then, it's been a surreal existence, things happening too fast to take all in. But then all of a sudden, you're standing there on the tarmac, and the flag-draped casket comes off the plane, and that is the moment when many families realize that this is for real and it is forever.
David, talk to us about the next steps now that these 3 soldiers have been returned home.
Well, there's a lengthy mortuary procedure that has to be gone through here. Among other things, they have to use DNA to absolutely 100% confirm the identities of the dead, even though there's no real doubt about that. And then the bodies have to be prepared for burial, and then the families choose where they want the soldier to be buried. A family can choose Arlington, but if it's Arlington National Cemetery, there's quite a waiting list at Arlington, so the burial will take place probably in a couple of months. Obviously, if they choose a cemetery closer to home, then the burial is part of the next stop, and the remains get transported to the place of burial, and then, you know, the families have to get on with life.
David, if you'll stay with us just a moment, I believe we have our Nancy Cordes. Actually, let's go ahead and watch these images of the dignified transfer. There you see, as David was mentioning, the flag. The moment, as David recounted, for many families becomes very real at that time, seeing the American flag on those transfer cases. I was going to bring in our Nancy Cordes. Nancy, if you're with us, our chief White House correspondent, can you talk to us a bit about what we have heard from the president in the wake of the deaths of these soldiers?
Well, we know, Elaine, first of all, that the president reached out to the family members of the 3 soldiers that were killed, 3 members of the U.S. Army Reserve, 2 of whom were promoted posthumously to the rank of sergeant. And this is one of the most solemn duties that a president has, is to call family members of fallen U.S. soldiers or airmen. And we actually got a glimpse into one of those conversations because the family of one of the service members actually shared the video of them taking that phone call with the Atlantic Journal-Constitution. And, you know, this is something that the president speaks to often with these family members in a very personal way, having lost several of his own immediate family members, including his first wife, his daughter in an accident, and then, of course, his son, Beau, who had served in the military himself. And so you could clearly hear the anguish in the voices, not just of the parents of one of those service members, but also the president himself, as he said, "I know what you're going through." They're on the tarmac right now. Obviously, we see the president and the first lady. We also see the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who has not been seen all that much over the past month because, as you know, he was recovering from a stint in the hospital. But he is there today to pay his respects, as is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I saw one of Delaware's U.S. Senators, Chris Coons, standing there as well, all there to pay tribute to the victims as they come home en route to their final resting place.
Now, Nancy, this has become relatively uncommon in recent years because the U.S. has withdrawn from conflicts overseas. I'm wondering what more we have learned from the White House, what they are saying about today's ritual, how the president is feeling. It looks like a very emotional moment.
Right. It truly does. I'm sure the president is thinking of his own son at a time like this, who he lost only a few years ago. And this is an experience that Mr. Biden has had as president only once before. Back in 2021, just about 7 months after he took office, when 13 service members were killed, as you'll recall, in a suicide bombing at Kabul airport during the final chaotic days of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. So much controversy surrounding that pullout, whether it could have been better prepared. In that instance, some of the family members were more interested than others in meeting with him. So it was a very delicate situation, but he did go to Dover to pay tribute to those fallen service members as well. And so it's been a couple of years, thankfully, since he has had to make another trip like this. And it is the first time since the Israel Hamas war began back in October, that U.S. service members have been killed. They've certainly been targeted. We know that they have been, their bases have been struck some 165 times over the past few months by militants that the U.S. says are connected with Iran, are being funded by Iran, get weaponry from Iran, and he has vowed to respond. And we've been led to believe that these responses will be multi-tiered, so possibly they could take place over several days, but we're still waiting to learn more about the scope and the location of those responses.
David, I was going to ask you the same question. Is there anything you can add to what Nancy just told us about how the United States plans to respond, given the complexity of the situation now?
Sure. Just a comment. I've been watching on the monitor here, and you can tell from the look on the president's face, he's not just going through the motions here. I did not see them in the video that's run so far, but also present at this ceremony is the Army Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Army, the top general in the Army and the top civilian in the Army. And ever since the war in Afghanistan began back in 2001, the Army has had a policy that whenever a fallen soldier comes home, a general officer has to be there to meet the plane. Now, as Nancy said, in recent years there have been very few of these fallen soldiers returning, but that used to be at the heights of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It used to be a daily duty for generals in the United States Army. One of them was on call to go to Dover at any hour to greet a fallen soldier. As to what the U.S. is going to do in retaliation, the administration has been telegraphing a retaliatory strike all week, starting on Monday when President Biden has said publicly he has made up his mind about what he is going to do in response to the attack which killed the three and all the previous 160 attacks, which hadn't really, had not actually killed any other American service member, but were just a constant of life, near daily attacks. And that retaliation has been in the preparation all week, and we are just getting closer and closer to the moment when that happens.
So if you are just joining us now, we have been watching the dignified transfer of 3 U.S. service members who were killed in an unmanned drone attack on Tower 22 in Jordan over the weekend. We want to pay tribute to Sergeant William Rivers, 46 years old, Sergeant Kennedy Sanders, 24, and Sergeant Breonna Moffett, 23. All 3 were from Georgia. Their remains were transferred back to their families today. And we saw those transfer boxes with the U.S. flag draped over them. Now in private, the families have control over their remains and are moving forward with that process of grief that the U.S. military tries to help direct them through. You see there the transfer boxes just moments ago as it arrived in Dover Air Force Base.
David, I'd like to just ask you closing thoughts here on what is, as Nancy pointed out, one of the most solemn duties a Commander-in-Chief can perform, being present for a dignified transfer.
Well, it doesn't get any less solemn with repetition. We've all seen these before. We've seen them when the entire plane was filled with flag-draped caskets, when there was a crash of a helicopter carrying Navy SEALs, and I think the number was 22 killed in that one crash. And there were days in Iraq and Afghanistan when the U.S. was losing troops in the double figures every day. So I suppose we should all be thankful that this has become a relatively rare event. But boy, when you look at it, it's still as gripping as the first time you see it.
And Nancy, as we see, this is now another feed. We just want to explain for our viewers, we're getting this videotape in from pool cameras that are positioned there at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. This is another vantage point, we are told, which is why this appears new. Nancy, tell us again about what we might expect to see here from President Biden. We saw that anguish on his face here as he stood watching this dignified transfer play out. What is likely to be coming here from the Biden administration as a response in the days ahead?
Well, he has vowed to respond. The challenge, Elaine and Lana, is figuring out how to respond without coming into direct conflict with Iran and risking an escalation that the U.S. doesn't want, and most likely Iran doesn't want either. They want to send a strong message to these rebel groups that are being funded by Iran, but certainly if they were to strike on Iranian territory, for example, which is something they haven't done so far, that would most likely be seen as a provocation to Iran. In fact, just today, Iran's president spoke and said that we will not start a war, but if a cruel force wants to bully us, the Islamic Republic of Iran will give a strong response. So this is something that the U.S. is weighing very carefully as they try to decide where exactly to strike back. Do they strike back within Iranian territory? Do they strike back on Iranian assets outside of the country, as they have been doing so far in Syria and Iraq? And will it have any effect? We saw them a few weeks ago fire a barrage of missiles at targets in Yemen to try to discourage the Houthi rebels, who are also backed by Iran, from staging attacks on U.S. and commercial shipping vessels. And it didn't have much of a deterrent effect. The Houthis are still attacking. In fact, they got within a mile of a U.S. destroyer this week in the Red Sea. And so these are the complicated factors that U.S. officials here at the White House and at the Pentagon are weighing as they try to decide how exactly to send Iran a message after 3 U.S. service members were killed.
And such a solemn event, and the emotion of it clear on President Biden's face, does that affect at all the calculation and how the U.S. responds to the deaths of these service members, David?
Well, I'm not sure the U.S. would be responding if that drone had gone off and nobody had been killed or injured. Obviously, this strike, when it comes, is going to be designed to say you cannot get away with killing Americans. Now, President Biden has been at the senior levels of government for a very long time, and I'm sure he's able to draw the line between his emotions and what would be a smart military operation. And if you were just to let your emotions reign, you would probably want to go to the source, which is Iran. But every indication we have is that they are not going to go to the source inside Iran, but they're going to go after targets in Iraq and Syria, both the militias which actually carry out the attacks, but are really frontmen for Iran. And so to get past the frontmen, they're also going to go after Iranian locations and personnel inside Iraq and Syria. Now, this strike has been so widely telegraphed that no one in Iraq can be under much doubt about what is coming. And so if you're a member of militia, or if you're a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, you have probably gone to ground in Iraq and Syria, if not having fled the country entirely. So it may be hard to find individuals, but there are plenty of facilities, training areas, warehouses where the weapons that they fire are stored. They can be taken out, and if you take enough of them out, by the time the actual operatives, the people who carry out the attacks and who coordinate the attacks, come out of hiding, they won't have as much to work with. But I don't think anybody thinks that a strike or even a series of strikes that lasts a number of days is going to end the threat of attacks against U.S. troop locations in Iraq and Syria.
We're going to pause now, just in a moment of respect for the 3 fallen soldiers. You see now the remains of those 3 fallen soldiers being transported from Dover Air Force Base. We have with us David Martin at the Pentagon, who was explaining just before our moment of silence part of the U.S.'s response. We also have our Nancy Cordes outside of the White House. But David, I want to just follow up with you on your point about the U.S.'s response and when this might take place. And if you could explain, please, for our audience, how weather might factor into that. And now that these remains are back in the U.S., should we expect that military action to be taken out imminently?
Well, I don't know that there was any direct relationship between this ceremony and the timing of the attack, but I think it could well serve as the prelude to an attack which has been in the works really since the moment this drone went off last Sunday. But as a practical military matter, you need good weather so the pilots can have eyes on their targets, and you need good intelligence, particularly if you're going to go after individuals, because you want to know their whereabouts. I was mentioning earlier that most of the people they want to go after have gone to ground. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't know, or the U.S. intelligence doesn't know where they are. They're just in a place where they can't be attacked, and usually that means just going home and surrounding yourself with your wife and children.
Nancy, just want to go back to what we saw a few moments ago, that incredibly powerful image as that last salute was given before the doors were closed. I was imagining what must be going through the minds and hearts of the family members who are not pictured here, but who are standing on that flight line, watching this unfold and watching as the door is closed and knowing what lies ahead for them. And I was thinking about the incredible pressure there must be. I wonder if you could speak to that for President Biden to respond in such a fashion that there is no doubt about the seriousness of the United States' willingness to react and respond quickly to these deaths. I wonder if you could talk about that sort of pressure that may be on President Biden, given the power of what we just saw.
He's facing pressure from a variety of fronts, Elaine. First and foremost, he wants to send a strong message to any would-be attackers not to try something like this again. So he's facing the pressure to prevent any further deaths of U.S. service members, because the reality is that they are always going to be based in pockets of the Middle East, and they're always going to face these kinds of danger. So that's the first thing. The second is he's under a lot of pressure from Congress. There are Republicans in Congress who felt that he should have taken a tougher line against Iran already, and who are pushing him to do more and to be more aggressive with Iran, something that the White House has been reluctant to do. They say there are major risks that are associated with that, but there's no question that he hears that commentary, that chatter coming from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. So there's a lot weighing on him, and and then, as you point out, this is a president who wears his emotions on his sleeve. This is something that is painful and difficult. This is something that this is an experience that he can relate to. He didn't go through exactly this experience, but he has lost loved ones who are close to him. He can, while we can't see those family members on the tarmac, I assume he can, and surely he can see what they are going through right now. And he had a chance to meet with them privately before this solemn transfer took place in a room there at the base. And so he's intimately familiar at this point with these family members and the pain that they are going through. And that is, as the commander-in-chief, that's always going to be something that is difficult to experience.
All right, David Martin, Nancy Cordes, thank you.
And we're going to take a short break. You're watching CBS News.